Never look them in the eyes after a raid. A Marine Lance Corporal stepped out of the chow line at Firebase Coral just after 0400, still half asleep, M16 slung low. He almost walked straight into the Australian coming the other way. Tall, lean, jungle green soaked black with dew and something darker. The SAS trooper had returned 20 minutes earlier. No one had heard the patrol come in. Their eyes met for less than a second. The Australian's gaze was open, but nothing lived behind it. No anger, no exhaustion, no recognition. Just flat green-black jungle staring back. The same motionless void you see when you shine a light down a well at night. The Marine felt his stomach drop, as though the ground had vanished. He jerked his head away so fast his neck cracked, cold sweat breaking across his shoulders. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. By evening, every fresh arrival at Coral had heard the same quiet sentence, passed like contraband cigarettes. Never look them in the eyes after a raid. That one involuntary glance became the first unofficial rule the Americans learned about the men from one SAS squadron. Not the knives, not the body count, the eyes. In 1968, the numbers already refused to add up. 500,000 Americans, artillery, arc light strikes, Hueys on call 24/7, against roughly 300 Australian SAS across Phuc Tuy and the surrounding provinces. Yet patrol after patrol, the Australians returned kill ratios that made staff officers in Saigon reach for calculators and then quietly close the folders. 10-1, 15-1, sometimes higher. Initial reports were dismissed as Commonwealth bravado. Then the observers went out. They came back different. The difference wasn't equipment. The Australians carried the same rifles most of the time, the same radios, less air support. The difference was doctrinal, and it went bone deep. Where American special operations trained for violence of action, hit hard, hit fast, extract, the SAS trained to become the jungle itself. They did not fight the terrain. They waited until the terrain agreed to help them kill. Selection broke men for months before they ever saw Vietnam. 90+% attrition. Survivors learned to lie motionless until cramps became background noise, to breathe so shallowly that condensation never formed on leaves above them, to smell cordite or sweat or fear on the wind long before sound or sight confirmed it. And then there were the Aboriginal trackers attached to some patrols, men whose families had read country the same way for 40,000 years. A scuff on bark, a displaced pebble, the way a spider web hung broken. They translated it into direction, numbers, load, even intent. American intelligence spent weeks failing to find caches that an Aboriginal NCO located in under an hour. But the real fracture line appeared after dark. The Australians did not announce their presence with gunfire unless they had no choice. Night work was silent work. Observation for days. Approach measured in inches per minute. Final close-in done with blades or hands or garrots, tools that demanded you feel the moment life left. And when they walked back into camp at false dawn, they carried something new in their faces. They spoke less. Not out of arrogance. Words simply seemed unnecessary. They cleaned weapons in perfect silence. Movements mechanical, eyes fixed on nothing. Birds that normally screamed at first light went quiet when an SAS man passed. Insects avoided landing on their sleeves. The jungle, which had accepted them as its own during the hours of darkness, still recognized them hours later. The Americans noticed. They felt it in the air around the Aussies' hooch, like standing too close to a live wire that wasn't humming yet. No one joked about it. No one asked what they had seen or done. They just started repeating the same quiet instruction to every new replacement who stared too long. Never look them in the eyes after a raid. Because once you did, you understood they weren't entirely back yet. Part of them was still out there, moving through the dark with the same patient, unhurried purpose. And whatever they had traded away in that darkness to come home alive, it showed. The men who came back with those eyes had been remade long before Vietnam ever touched them. Australian SAS doctrine didn't begin in Phuoc Tuy. It began in the Owen Stanley Range, in the green hell of New Guinea during 42 to 45, where small Australian commando teams learned that the jungle doesn't care about your rank, your firepower, or your nationality. It only respects those who learn to disappear inside it. Later, in the Malayan emergency of the 1950s, they hunted CT insurgents through triple canopy forest that made Vietnam look open. They didn't bomb villages or call in TAC air. They stalked. They waited. They killed quietly. By the time the first SAS squadron rotated into Vietnam in '66, the unit already carried a body of knowledge measured in decades of blood and silence. Selection was the first filter. Candidates arrived fit, most left broken. Sleep deprivation stretched into days. Navigation courses ran 60 kilometers through knife-edged ridges with 30-kilo packs and no food. Sleep was rationed to minutes snatched in ambush positions where the slightest twitch could kill the patrol. The washout rate hovered at 92 to 95%. Those who remained weren't simply tougher, they were different. They had learned to regard pain as weather, present, irrelevant, passing. They could force their heart rate down to 50 beats a minute while lying prone in direct sunlight. They could smell the difference between fresh human feces and day-old on the breeze. They could hear a safety catch click 50 meters through dripping foliage. But the real multiplier arrived in small, quiet men who rarely wore the same green as the rest. Aboriginal trackers, sometimes one per patrol, sometimes two, brought skills no military school could teach. Their families had followed spoor across the red center and the tropical north for 40 millennia. A footprint wasn't just a print, it was a paragraph. Depth told weight. Toe splay told fatigue or haste. The angle of a broken twig told direction of travel and whether the man was carrying a load on one shoulder or balanced. They could read a trail that had been rained on twice and still estimate numbers, weapons, even morale from the spacing of steps. One tracker famously led a patrol 8 kilometers to a Viet Cong platoon harbor after smelling urine on leaves that had been dry for 36 hours. Americans who saw it happen stopped laughing. They had infrared, starlight scopes, seismic sensors, defoliants, helicopter gunships. The Australians had eyes that read the jungle the way a clerk reads a ledger, methodical, complete, unforgiving. Together, the combination was lethal in ways doctrine hadn't predicted. SAS patrols moved like water between stones. They left no litter, no cut branches that could be seen from the air, no latrine pits deeper than a hand scrape. They ate cold, slept in shifts so shallow the body never fully shut down. And when they hunted as predators do, patient until the moment of commitment, then absolute. The change in the men themselves began during selection, but finished in the field. After the first few long-range patrols, something shifted irreversibly. Not trauma in the clinical sense, not yet, but a recalibration. The jungle stopped being background. It started speaking directly. A change in bird calls wasn't random, it was warning. A sudden silence in cicadas wasn't coincidence, it was presence. The operators began to anticipate rather than react. They moved before danger announced itself. They sensed shifts in pressure the way animals do before a storm. And when they killed close, because silence demanded closeness, the act left residue. Not guilt, not in most cases. Something colder. The moment you drive steel into a sleeping throat or choke out a sentry while his pulse hammers against your forearm, you cross a line no training can simulate. You feel the exact instant life leaves, not metaphorically, physically. The second the body stops fighting, the second the eyes empty. After that first, deliberate, personal kill in the dark, something in your own eyes changes to match. They didn't talk about it. They didn't need to. When they returned to base, the silence around them thickened. They sat apart. They cleaned rifles with the same slow, ritual precision they used in the field. Their hands moved without wasted motion. Their gaze stayed fixed on middle distance. Nearby wildlife reacted as though they still carried the scent of predator. Birds lifted off branches when they passed. Insects stayed clear of their skin. The Americans felt it most acutely. A trooper from one SAS squadron could walk through the perimeter wire at dawn, nod once to the sentry, and keep walking. No words, no eye contact unless forced. And if you made the mistake of meeting his gaze, especially in the first hours after stand-down, you saw the jungle still looking back. Flat, green, patient, waiting for the next night. The real work happened after the sun dropped below the tree line. Australian SAS patrols didn't rush the dark. They let it settle first. For 3, 4, sometimes 7 days they ghosted forward, never more than a kilometer or two in 24 hours. Movement was measured in heartbeats. Lift boot, feel for dry leaf or twig, ease weight down, pause, repeat. They lived on cold rice, cold tea, cold silence. No cooking fires, no cigarettes, no radio chatter unless the world was already burning. When they reached the target zone, they didn't attack. They studied. From concealed hides, positions so perfect the Americans sometimes walked within 5 meters and never saw them. They watched every rhythm of the enemy camp. Who smoked first at dusk? Which sentry changed posts early? Where the commander slept? Which trails carried the most traffic at 0300? They drew mental maps until every man could close his eyes and walk the layout in perfect sequence. Then came the night they chose. They moved in pairs or trios. No signals beyond the faintest brush of fingers on wrist. Breathing synchronized to the point where one man's inhale covered another's exhale. They timed steps to the wind rustling canopy, to distant monkey calls, to the low thrum of insects. Nature became their metronome. Close-in work was never loud. Firearms were last resort. Muzzle flash and report gave away position for kilometers. Instead, they used what the jungle had taught them: steel, cord, hands. A sentry's throat opened with a single controlled draw, blade entering below the angle of the jaw, exiting through the windpipe. No arterial spray if you angled right, just a soft gurgle swallowed by the night. A neck snapped with forearm pressure and body weight. Quick pop, then limp. Garrots tightened until resistance stopped. Every kill demanded proximity. You smelled the man's last meal, felt the heat of his skin, heard the final involuntary twitch in his larynx. That closeness left marks, not scars on the body, marks inside. Each time you crossed that final centimeter and felt life stop under your hands, something in you detached. Not dramatically, not with ceremony. Just a small, permanent shift. The part of you that still hesitated, still remembered civilian rules, eroded a little more. What replaced it was colder, quieter, more efficient. You didn't become a monster. You became a mechanism that the jungle approved of. When the job was done, bodies checked, documents lifted, cash noted for later, they withdrew the same way they came. Slow, deliberate, invisible. No running, no whoops of adrenaline. Just the same patient crawl back through the green. Dawn found them slipping through the wire at base. They moved like men who had forgotten how to hurry. They stacked weapons, stripped gear, began the slow disassembly and cleaning of rifles that had never been fired. No conversation. Eyes stayed low or fixed on nothing. The camp noise, clatter of mess kits, low curses, helicopter rotors spooling up, seemed to slide around them without touching. Wildlife noticed first. Birds that had been screaming territorial warnings all morning went quiet when an operator walked past. Cicadas cut off mid-chorus. Even the mosquitoes, thick as fog at dusk, avoided landing on exposed skin. The jungle still smelled them as predator, hours after the last kill. The Americans felt the shift without words. A trooper would sit on his bunk, field stripping an SLR with mechanical precision, gaze locked somewhere beyond the sandbags. If you spoke to him, he answered, short, flat, correct. But his attention never fully returned. Part of him was still out there, listening to the bush breathe, waiting for the next sound that didn't belong. And if you were foolish enough to catch his eye in those first daylight hours, you saw it clearly. The green-black stillness, the same flat patience that had watched a man die without blinking. No rage, no triumph, just the jungle looking through him, still hungry, still waiting. In March 1969, a 3-man American observation team went out with an 8-man patrol from one SAS squadron. The mission was listed as Allied Tactical Exchange. The real order was simpler. Find out why the Australians were killing 10 times more per patrol with a fraction of the support. The team was solid, a Green Beret major with 2 tours already, a Marine Force Recon captain who'd led long-range patrols in Fur Corps, and an intel captain who specialized in unconventional doctrine. All combat veterans. All certain they had seen the worst the war could offer. They spent 13 days in the bush. The first 5 days were movement, less than 8 kilometers total. The patrol traveled mostly at night, lying up in concealed positions by day. The Americans struggled to spot their own patrol members, even when they knew the rough location. Operators melted into the foliage, face paint, natural shadow, absolute stillness. No silhouette, no outline, just jungle. Days 6 through 10 were observation. From a hide overlooking a suspected Viet Cong way station and supply point, they watched. 4 days without movement beyond breathing. They mapped every sentry change, every piss break, every whispered conversation carried on the wind. The Americans grew restless. Marine training screamed for action. This felt like paralysis. The major later admitted he almost called for extraction on day 8. He didn't. On the 11th night, the weather gave them cover. Thick cloud, recent rain softening the ground, light wind masking small sounds. The patrol split into 4 2-man teams. Each had a designated sector and target set. Timing had been drilled through hand signals until it ran on instinct. The Americans stayed back at the OP with orders not to move, not to interfere, not to make a sound. What followed took 18 minutes. Sentries vanished one by one. No flash, no cry. 1 second a man stood at his post. The next, the post was empty. 4 positions cleared simultaneously with surgical timing. No conscious coordination needed anymore. The patrol moved as extension of one mind. Then the main body. The camp slept. The Australians flowed through it like smoke, No shots, no grenades, just close work. Blade under jaw, forearm across throat, quick twist and hold until stillness. Bodies eased to the ground without thump. One by one, 12 combatants neutralized in near silence. The only sounds the Americans later recalled were soft, wet exhalations, barely louder than a sigh, swallowed by the night. Intelligence packets were taken. The cache inventoried but left intact for follow-up. No booby traps, no messages, no mutilation. Just absence where men had been. Withdrawal took 3 hours for 2 kilometers. Same deliberate pace. No panic, no shortcuts. By noon the next day, the patrol was back inside the wire at base. Weapons cleaned, reports written. Men eating cold sea rations as though the previous 2 weeks had been routine. The Americans requested immediate dust-off to Saigon. Their classified debrief reached the Pentagon within days. Most of it stayed buried. But one line from the Green Beret Major's personal notes leaked through back channels and was quoted in restricted special operations seminars for years afterward. They aren't fighting the war. They are the war. 7 words. They carried the weight of an admission no American wanted to make. That overwhelming firepower, air superiority, and technological edge could be outmatched by 8 men who had learned to wait longer, move quieter, and kill closer than doctrine allowed. The observers never fully recovered the certainty they carried in. They had watched something older than modern warfare, something patient, predatory, and complete. Something that didn't need artillery or extraction helicopters to win. And in the quiet hours afterward, when the patrol members sat cleaning already spotless weapons or simply staring into the tree line, the Americans remembered the one rule they had been taught before the mission even began. Never look them in the eyes after a raid. Because now they understood why. The jungle was still in there. Looking back, the men who walked back through the wire carried the jungle home with them. Not in souvenirs, not in photographs, in the way they held themselves afterward, in the silence that followed them like a second shadow, in the eyes that no longer fully returned. Psychological after-action reports, when they were written at all, spoke in clinical terms: hypervigilance, emotional numbing, difficulty re-engaging with base routine. The reality was simpler and colder. Something fundamental had been exchanged in the dark. Each close kill, each hour spent motionless waiting for the exact right second, each moment when you felt another human being's life stop under your hands, it carved away a piece of the civilian self that had once existed. What remained was leaner, quieter, more efficient, and less human in ways that words struggle to capture. Some operators buried their field knives in remote clearings before rotation home. Others locked them in ammo cans they never opened again. A few kept them close, sharpened religiously, oiled, handled like relics, but never spoke of what the steel remembered. The blade wasn't the problem. It was the hand that held it, and what that hand had become. Reintegration was brutal. Wives noticed the distance first. Children sensed the man who came back wasn't entirely the one who left. Conversations died after a few sentences. Crowds felt wrong. Noise felt wrong. Daylight felt exposed. Many sought the bush again, private land, remote stations, anywhere the green was thick enough to muffle the world. Others drank until the edges blurred. A few simply vanished into quiet lives where no one asked questions. The Viet Cong understood the change before the Americans did. Captured documents from late 1969 onward carried new warnings. Certain grid squares were marked "Avoid after dusk." Patrols were instructed to double sentries and still expect nothing. One directive, translated and filed in Australian intelligence, was stark. When the birds stop and the insects fall silent, do not search. Lie flat. Do not move. Do not breathe loud. If the Ma'ang have come, fighting will not save you. Only luck might. Ma'ang. Jungle ghosts. The name spread through enemy ranks faster than any propaganda. Supply lines withered in zones where SAS patrols operated. Local commanders died in their sleep. Replacements hesitated. Recruitment slowed. The psychological attrition was heavier than the body count. The Americans absorbed the lesson slowly, unevenly. Formal training exchanges with the SAS were requested, approved in small numbers, then quietly scaled back. The methods were too alien, too patient, too personal. American doctrine demanded scale, speed, technology, things that could be budgeted, manufactured, taught in classrooms. The Australian way demanded something else: time, stillness, willingness to become the thing you hunted. Some elements filtered through anyway. Modern SEAL and Green Beret courses now teach longer observation phases, noise discipline that borders on the obsessive, integration with indigenous scouts where terrain allows. But the core philosophy never fully crossed the Pacific. Firepower remains the American default. The patient hunt, the acceptance that sometimes the best weapon is 20 minutes of absolute silence, stays foreign. The warnings, though, survived. They passed mouth to mouth through firebase bunkers, through replacement briefs that never made it into official orders. Never look them in the eyes after a raid. The sentence mutated over time. It applied to other units later, certain SEAL platoons, a few recon teams, foreign operators whose gaze carried the same flat green weight. But it started with the Australians. Because they had gone furthest down that path. They had learned to wait until the jungle itself handed them the kill. They had looked into death at breathing distance until death looked back with recognition. And when they returned, part of that darkness stayed behind the eyes. 50 years on, most of the records remain classified or redacted. Veterans speak in fragments, if at all. The full measure of what was done in those nights, ethical lines crossed, boundaries blurred, sits in locked files and locked memories. But the one truth no classification can bury is this: in those jungles, for a few small teams of men, firepower and numbers were never the deciding factor. Patience was, stillness was, and the willingness to let the jungle change you forever. So the next time you pass one of those quiet ones, the ones who sit a little apart, who clean weapons they didn't fire, whose gaze slides past you like water over stone, remember the rule that was born in blood and silence. Never look them in the eyes after a raid, because some part of them is still out there, still moving, still waiting.